If they want to stop the truth, they'll have to catch me first.
The chandelier cast shadows across my adoptive mother's face as she delivered the words that would change everything. Jack, darling, we need to talk about your inheritance. I should have known something was wrong when they were frequently, most of them whenever inheritance, changing everything. I should have known something was wrong when Margaret Blackwood used the word darling. She'd never called me that in 32 years. Hell, she'd barely called me by name most of the time. I was always the boy or him when she spoke to the staff about me. What about it? I asked, cutting into the overpriced steak that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. The dining room in the Blackwood mansion always felt like a museum, all polished mahogany and oil paintings of dead relatives who looked down at us with disapproving eyes. Tonight, those painted faces seemed especially judgmental. My wife Evelyn sat across from me, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a wine glass that cost more than my monthly truck payment. She'd been unusually quiet all evening, which should have been my second warning sign. Evelyn was never quiet. As a high-powered attorney at Morrison, Lockwood & Associates, she lived for the sound of her own voice. Well, Margaret continued, dabbing at her lips with a cloth napkin that probably required a special cleaning service. Your father and I have been discussing the estate planning, and we've made some adjustments. Charles Blackwood, the man who'd raised me but never quite accepted me, cleared his throat. Even at 68, he commanded attention when he spoke. Jack, son, we've discovered some information about your background that changes things. What kind of information? I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. Margaret's smile was colder than the lake outside the mansion's windows. You're adopted, dear. We thought you knew. The words hit me like a physical blow. 32 years of feeling like an outsider in this family suddenly made perfect sense. The way they'd always treated me differently than my siblings, David and Patricia. The way I never quite fit into their world of country clubs and charity galas. The way Margaret would introduce me as our Jack instead of just our son. Adopted, I repeated. Remember that. I thank them. Margaret was one thing that, it's so justice one of the many reasons, that the main reasons that said. Adopted, I repeated, setting down my fork. For how long have you known? Since the beginning, obviously. Patricia chimed in from her seat next to David. My sister, well, adoptive sister, had always been the cruelest of the bunch. Did you really think you belonged here? Look at yourself, Jack. You work construction while David runs the family business. You live in that little house by the lake while we're here in the family estate. David nodded in agreement, his Harvard MBA practically radiating from his perfectly pressed suit. It's not personal, Jack. It's just business. The family wealth should stay with family. I am family, I said, but even as the words left like them, my mouth, they felt hollow. No, Margaret said, her voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. You were never really one of us. We tried, dear, we really did. But blood is blood, and you simply don't have ours. Who'd raised me, fed me, put me through school, and felt something die inside my chest. Then I looked at Evelyn, expecting to see some support, some outrage on my behalf. Instead, she was checking her phone. Evelyn, I said. She glanced up briefly. What? Oh, this is between you and your family, honey. I'm sure you'll work it out. Then she went back to her phone, typing rapidly. $31 million, Charles said, as if he was discussing the weather. That's what the estate is worth. It'll be divided between David and Patricia, with a small trust fund established for the grandchildren. What about me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Margaret's smile could have frozen hell. You'll always be welcome here for holidays, dear. You're not being disowned. You're just being right-sized. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could feel the blood rushing to my face. 32 years of birthdays, Christmases, family vacations, graduation ceremonies, all of it suddenly felt like charity, like they'd been doing me some grand favor by letting me exist in their orbit. Well, I said, standing up slowly, I guess that settles it then. Now don't be dramatic, Jack, David said. You've got your construction business, your little house. You'll be fine. My little house, I repeated. My construction business. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're right, David. I will be fine. Better than fine, actually. I walked toward the dining room door, then stopped and turned back. You know what the funny thing is? I always wondered why I felt different here, why I never quite fit in. Now I know. It's because I'm not a heartless, entitled piece of garbage. Jack, Margaret gasped. No, let me finish. You raised me for 32 years. You were at my high school graduation, my wedding, every major moment of my life. And now you're cutting me out like I'm some stranger who wandered in off the street. You want to know what that makes you? It makes you exactly the kind of people who would buy a child and then discard him when it became inconvenient. Patricia's face had gone pale. We didn't buy you. We adopted you legally. Same difference, I said. The deal, and now you're done. Well, congratulations. You've just made the biggest mistake of your lives. I walked out of that dining room, through the marble foyer with its ridiculous spiral staircase, and out the front door into the cool New England evening. Behind me, I could hear voices. Margaret calling my name, David saying something about being reasonable, Patricia laughing nervously. But it was Evelyn's voice that stopped me cold. She wasn't calling after me or trying to follow. Instead, I heard her say, "Brent, it's me." Yes, it went exactly like we planned. He's devastated. No, he has no idea about the real inheritance yet. I turned around slowly. Through the dining room window, I could see my wife of 5 years talking animatedly on her phone, gesturing with her free hand. She was smiling. Actually smiling, while discussing my devastation with someone named Brent. Brent Lockwood, senior partner at her law firm. The man she'd been working late with more and more frequently over the past few months. Standing there on the circular driveway of the Blackwood mansion, looking up at the family that had just disowned me, and the wife who was apparently celebrating my misery, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out who I really was. And then, I was going to make every single one of these people pay for what they'd done to me. The lake reflected the mansion's lights like scattered diamonds on black velvet. It was beautiful, peaceful, serene. Too bad the same couldn't be said for the people inside. I got in my pickup truck, my little truck, as Patricia would probably call it, and drove away from the only family I'd ever known. But as I drove, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I was going to do next. First thing in the morning, I was going to hire a private investigator. If I was adopted, that meant my real parents were out there somewhere, and something told me that Margaret and Charles Blackwood had no idea what they just unleashed. Frank Harlan's office looked like a tornado had hit a filing cabinet factory. Papers were stacked on every available surface. Empty coffee cups formed small cities on his desk, and the smell of cheap bourbon hung in the air like incense in a church. The man himself was exactly what Central Casting would order for grizzled private investigator. 60-something, gray stubble, eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. "So you want to find your birth parents," Frank said, leaning back in a chair that squeaked like a dying mouse. "Most people in your situation, they'd take some time to process, maybe see a therapist, work through their feelings." "I'm not most people," I said, sliding a check across his cluttered desk. "How long will it take?" Frank picked up the check and whistled low. "This is a lot of money, Jack. You sure you want to spend it on this? Sometimes the truth is uglier than the lie." The lie just cost me $31 million and possibly my marriage. How much uglier can the truth be? You'd be surprised. Frank opened a desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of Jim Beam. "Drink?" "It's 9 in the morning." "So?" I shook my head. Frank shrugged and poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon into a coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Dad." "Tell me about the adoption," he said. "What do you remember?" "Nothing. I was apparently very young when it happened. The Blackwoods never talked about it, never even hinted at it. As far as I knew, I was their biological son." "But you always felt different." "Yeah. How'd you know?" Vance took a sip of his bourbon coffee cocktail. "Because you're sitting in my office instead of a therapist's. People who fit in with their families don't usually go looking for other families when things get tough." He had a point. Even before last night's revelation, I'd always felt like an outsider in the Blackwood world. While David was groomed to take over the family investment firm, and Patricia was trained in the art of high society networking, I'd gravitated toward working with my hands. Construction, renovation, building things from the ground up. Margaret had always called it my phase, as if I'd eventually grow out of wanting to do honest work. "I'll need some basic information," Frank said, pulling out a yellow legal pad that had seen better decades. Full name, date of birth, any documentation you might have? Jack Michael Blackwood, born March 15th, 1991. At least, that's what my birth certificate says. Be amended after adoption. We'll need to dig deeper. Frank scribbled some notes. What about your wife? She's supportive of this little fact-finding mission? I thought about Evelyn's phone call last night, her casual dismissal of my pain, her smile as she discussed my devastation with Brent Lockwood. My wife has her own priorities right now. Frank's eyebrows went up. Trouble in paradise? You could say that. Want me to look into that too? Cheating spouse investigations are bread and butter in this business. Fleeing it for a moment, then shook my head. I can handle my wife myself. Just focus on finding my real parents. Your call. Frank finished his bourbon and stood up. I'll start with the adoption records, see what I can shake loose. Might take a few days, might take a few weeks. These things don't move fast. Money talks, I said. Make it talk loudly. Frank grinned, showing teeth that had seen better decades along with the legal pad. Now you're speaking my language. I left Frank's office feeling like I'd at least taken some action, made some forward progress. But as I drove through downtown Millbrook toward my house, my little house, as the Blackwoods would say, I couldn't shake the image of Evelyn's smile from last night. My house sat on a small lot about half a mile from the lake, nothing fancy but comfortable. I'd bought it right after Evelyn and I got married, thinking it would be a good starter home. Evelyn had made it clear from the beginning that she considered it temporary, a stepping stone to something more appropriate for a successful attorney and her husband. Now, looking at the modest two-bedroom ranch with its small yard and single-car garage, I realized I loved this place. It was mine. I'd earned it, paid for it, maintained it with my own hands. Unlike the Blackwood mansion with its inherited wealth and old money pretensions, this house represented honest work and real accomplishment. I was unlocking the front door when my phone rang. Evelyn's name appeared on the screen. Jack, where are you? I woke up and you weren't here. I'm at home, I said, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. Home? This isn't your home anymore, remember? You live here now, with me, in our apartment. Our apartment. The overpriced two-bedroom in downtown Millbrook that Evelyn had insisted we rent because it was more appropriate for her professional image. I'd kept the house as a workshop and occasional retreat, but Evelyn was right. Technically, I lived with her now. I needed some space to think, I said. About last night? Jack, I know it was a shock, but you have to understand this doesn't change anything between us. You're still my husband. I still love you. The words sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in the mirror. Do you, Evelyn? Do you really? Of course I do. Why would you even ask that? Because last night, while I was having my entire world turned upside down, you were more interested in your phone than in supporting your husband. I was working, Jack. You know how demanding my job is. Working, right. I walked into the kitchen and opened the kitchen before we stating the stuff. I was excellently fine them big future than I work. I was working, right. I walked into the kitchen and opened the kitchen, then everybody convinced your store clearing with his business for. Working, right. You know how demanding my job is. Working, right. I working within MasterCards. She did not find the moment. I was working. Right. I walked into the kitchen and opened the kitchen before we stating the stuff. I was working. Right. I walked into the kitchen and opened the kitchen, then everybody convinced your store clearing than his business for. I was working. Right. I walked into the kitchen and opened the kitchen, then everybody convinced your store clearing than his business for. Working. Right. I walked into the kitchen and opened the kitchen, then everybody convinced your store clearing than his business for. Walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator looking for something to eat. The shelves were mostly empty. I hadn't spent much time here lately. Who's Brent, Evelyn? The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that she was Vin Brent and she did it. I thought the call had dropped. Evelyn? Brent is my senior partner. You were discussing our personal business with him. Why? I wasn't discussing our personal business. He was asking about dinner, about whether I'd be back to the office tonight. Another lie in the past I see. Well, don't let me keep you from your work. Jack, wait. I think we should talk about this, about us, about what happened last night. About our future. Our future, I repeated. What future is that exactly? The one where I'm cut out of the family fortune and you pretend to be okay with it? Or the one where you're working late with Brent every night? Glenn, you're being paranoid. Capitalists. Am I? Then you won't mind if I come by your office today. Maybe meet this Brent? See what kind of work you two have been doing together? Another long pause. He's not in today. He's in court. Of course he is. I hung up before she could say anything else. My phone immediately started ringing again, but I turned it off and tossed it on the kitchen counter. The house felt different now, like it was welcoming me back after a long absence. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the small kitchen table, looking out the window at the backyard where I'd built a deck last summer. Evelyn had complained that it was too small, that we should have hired professionals, that it wasn't up to the standards she expected. But I'd built it with my own hands, and it was solid. It would last, unlike my marriage, apparently. My phone buzzed with a text message. I almost ignored it, thinking it was Evelyn, but the number was unfamiliar. This is Frank. Call me. Found something interesting about your adoption. You're going to want to hear this. I stared at the message for a long moment. Frank had said it might take days or weeks to find anything. It had been less than 2 hours. I called him back immediately. That was fast, I said when he answered. Sometimes the universe wants you to know something, Frank said. Can you come back to my office? This isn't something I want to discuss over the phone. On my way. My keys and headed for the door, but stopped when I saw a familiar car pulling into my driveway. Evelyn's silver BMW, the one she'd bought with her signing bonus from the law firm. She got out of the car wearing the expression she usually reserved for hostile witnesses. Determined, slightly aggressive, ready for a fight. She was still in her work clothes from yesterday, which meant she'd either slept at the apartment in her suit or she'd never gone home at all. We need to talk, she said as she approached the front door. I'm on my way out. This is important, Jack, about us, about our marriage. Our marriage, I said, unlocking my truck. The one where you discuss my personal business with your boss? The one where you work late every night with a man whose name makes you nervous? That marriage? Ev, you're being ridiculous. Brent is a colleague, nothing more. Then you won't mind if I call him right now, introduce myself properly. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through contacts. What's his number? Jack, stop. Stop what? Calling your colleague, your work partner, He's not just a colleague. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Evelyn's face had gone pale and her hands were shaking slightly. What is he then? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We've been seeing each other for about 3 months. 3 months. 3 months of late nights, of work emergencies, of her coming home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. I see, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. And last night, when my entire world was falling apart, you were what, celebrating with him? It wasn't like that. What was it like then, Evelyn? Explain it to me. She looked down at her feet, unable to meet my eyes. We knew about the adoption. Brent has connections. He'd heard rumors about the Blackwood family making changes to their estate planning. We thought if you knew the truth, you might be motivated to find your real parents. Why would you care about my real parents? Because, she said, still not looking at me, we did some research. Your biological father is someone important, someone wealthy. We thought maybe the pieces fell into place with sickening steck. And we know what we thought, she said. Looks like the choice of stuff trouble when we thought your meeting. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. You thought maybe I'd inherit from my real family instead. You and Brent figured you'd help me lose one fortune so I could find another one. It wasn't like that. I got into my truck and started the engine. You know what, Evelyn? Thanks. Thanks for showing me exactly who you really are before I wasted any more years on this marriage. Jack, wait. I backed out of the driveway, leaving my cheating wife standing in front of the house she'd never considered good enough for her. In the rearview mirror, I could see her pulling out her phone, probably calling Brent to tell him their plan had backfired. As I drove back toward Frank's office, I found myself laughing, not with humor, but with the bitter recognition of how completely I'd been played. The Blackwoods had used me as a charity case for 32 years, and my own wife had been using me as a meal ticket. Well, they were all about to learn what happened when you underestimated Jack Blackwood, or whoever the hell I really was. Frank's office looked exactly the same as it had 2 hours earlier, but the man himself seemed different, more alert, more focused, like he'd stumbled onto something that had woken him up from a decades-long stupor. "Sit down," he said without preamble, "and maybe pour yourself that drink I offered earlier. You're going to need it." I remained standing. "Just tell me what you found." Frank opened a manila folder on his desk and pulled out several documents. "Your adoption was handled by a very exclusive law firm in Boston, the kind that specializes in discretion and making problems disappear. The records were sealed, but I have a contact who owes me a favor. And? Your birth name was Jonathan Michael Thornfield. You were born March 15th, 1991, in Boston General Hospital, to Elizabeth Thornfield and—" Frank paused, looking at me over his reading glasses. "This is where it gets interesting. Your biological father is William Thornfield." The name meant nothing to me. Should I know who that is? Former Prime Minister of Canada, served 2 terms in the 90s, retired from politics about 10 years ago. He's worth approximately $200 million. I sat down hard in the squeaky chair. $200 million. That's conservative. The man owns half of downtown Toronto, has investments in mining, tech, real estate. He's what you might call stupid rich. Why was I adopted? Why didn't they keep me? Clum's expression grew grim. Because you were abducted. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? March 20th, 1991. 5 days after you were born. Someone took you from the hospital nursery. The case made international headlines for about 6 months, then quietly disappeared from the news. The official story was that the hijackers were never found, and the baby was presumed dead. I stared at the documents in Frank's hands, trying to process what he was telling me. But I wasn't dead. I was here, with the Blackwoods. Exactly. Which raises some very interesting questions about how Charles and Margaret Blackwood came to adopt an abducted baby with no questions asked. They knew? Had to. You don't just acquire a newborn through legal channels without extensive background checks, waiting periods, documentation. But a couple with enough money and the right connections, they could make an abducted baby disappear into the system, create new paperwork, new identity. I felt sick. They bought me. From hijackers. From hijackers. That's my working theory, yes. Jesus. I put my head in my hands, trying to wrap my mind around it all. My real parents think I'm dead. Said, they don't. I looked up. What do you mean? William and Elizabeth Thornfield never stopped looking for you. They hired private investigators, offered rewards, kept the case active long after the police gave up. About 5 years ago, they got a lead that their son might be alive and living in New England under an assumed identity. 5 years ago, that's when Evelyn and I got married. Interesting timing. Frank made a note on his legal pad. There's more. The Thornfields have been quietly investigating the Blackwood family for the past 2 years. They know about you, Jack. They know where you are, who you are, what you do for a living. They've been watching you. Watching me? Why haven't they wrecked the biggest change that their list looking them back? Watching me? Why haven't they made contact? Because they're building a case. They want to prove not just that you're their son, but that the Blackwoods were involved in your abduction. They want justice, not just a reunion. I stood up and walked to Frank's grimy window, looking out at the street below. A black sedan was parked across from the building, its windows tinted dark. As I watched, a man in a suit got out of the passenger side and looked up at Frank's office window. Frank, I said, are we being watched? Frank joined me at the window and cursed under his breath. That's not good. Who are they? Could be anybody, the Blackwoods, the Thornfields, or someone else entirely who doesn't want this story coming to light. As we watched, the man in the suit crossed the street and entered the building. Frank's office was on the 3rd floor of a rundown building that housed a bail bondsman, a tax preparation service, and a massage parlor that probably offered more than massages. Back exit? I asked. Fire escape. But Jack, if you run now, you'll never get answers. And if I stay, I might not live to hear them. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside Frank's office. Frank quickly gathered the documents from his desk and stuffed them into the manila folder, then handed it to me. Everything's in there. Birth records, adoption papers, police reports from the abduction investigation. Your real parents' contact information is on the last page. The footsteps stopped outside Frank's door. A polite knock followed. "Mr. Harlan, my name is Detective Morrison with the Boston Police Department. I'd like to ask you some questions about a case you've been working on." At each other. Boston was 3 hours away. Local cops didn't make house calls to private investigators in small New England towns unless something big was happening. "Just a minute," Frank called out, then quietly to me, "Fire escape, go now." I tuck the folder inside my jacket and represent them and make them get in the screen little big cards, headed for the window that led to the fire escape. As I climbed out, I could hear Frank opening his office door. "Detective Morrison, I wasn't expecting Boston PD today. What can I do for you?" I didn't stick around to hear the answer. The fire escape was rusty and probably hadn't been inspected since the Carter administration, but it held my weight as I climbed down to the alley behind the building. My truck was parked on the street in front, but I didn't dare go back for it. Instead, I walked quickly through the alley toward the main street, keeping my head down and trying to look like just another guy heading to lunch. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number again. Coffee shop on Main Street. Corner booth. Come alone. A friend. Brunswick. I looked around trying to spot whoever had sent the message. Main Street was busy with the usual midday crowd. Office workers grabbing lunch, mothers with strollers, elderly couples window shopping. Any one of them could be watching me. The coffee shop was a local place called Grind, the kind of establishment that served artisanal drinks to people who thought Starbucks was too corporate. I found the corner booth and sat down facing the door, the manila folder on the seat beside me. A waitress with purple hair and multiple piercings approached. "What can I get you?" Dismayed. "Coffee, black, and keep it coming." I nodded and walked away. 4:47 p.m. Less than 24 hours ago, I'd been Jack Blackwood, adopted son and construction worker. Now, I was Jonathan Thornfield, abducted heir to a fortune that made the Blackwood money look like pocket change. A man in his 50s approached the booth, well-dressed but not flashy, the kind of guy who could blend into any crowd. He slid into the seat across from me without invitation. "Mr. Thornfield," he said, "my name is Michael Chen. I work for your father." "My father?" "William Thornfield. He sent me to make contact with you." "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Chen reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. It showed a man and woman, both in their 50s, standing in front of what looked like a government building. The man had my eyes, my jawline, my build. The woman had my nose, my mouth, the same stubborn set to her chin that I saw in the mirror every morning. "Your parents," Chen said. "They've been looking for you for 32 years. I stared at the photograph, seeing my own features reflected in these strangers' faces. "Why now? Why make contact now?" "Because yesterday, you were still part of the Blackwood family. Today, you're not. That changes the legal landscape considerably." "Legal landscape?" "Your parents want to prosecute the people who took you from them. But as long as you were living as a Blackwood, as long as you considered them your family, it would have been difficult to make a case. Now that they've disowned you," Chen shrugged, "now you're a sufferer instead of a willing participant." The waitress brought my coffee. Chen ordered tea, Earl Grey, no sugar. We sat in silence until she left. "What do they want from me?" I asked. "To meet you, to tell you the truth about what happened, and to give you a choice." "What kind of choice? Whether you want to reclaim your birthright or continue living as Jack Blackwood?" "What birthright?" Consulted for the first time since sitting down. "You're the sole heir to the Thornfield fortune. $200 million, plus trusts, investments, properties. Your parents never had other children. They've been waiting 32 years to give it all to you." I thought about Margaret Blackwood's cold smile, her casual dismissal of 32 years of family history. "You were never really one of us." I thought about Evelyn's betrayal, her calculating manipulation of my emotions for financial gain. I thought about David and Patricia's smug certainty that they deserved the family wealth more than I did. "When can I meet them?" I asked. Chen pulled out his phone and made a call. "William? He's ready to meet you. Yes, sir. We'll be there in an hour." He hung up and looked at me. "They're at the Millbrook Inn, presidential suite. They've been waiting there for 3 days, hoping you'd agree to see them." 3 days? "They knew the Blackwoods were planning to tell you about the adoption. We've been monitoring their communications for months." I finished my coffee and stood up. "Let's go meet my real parents." As we left the coffee shop, I caught a glimpse of the black sedan from earlier parked across the street. Chen noticed it too. "We may have company," he said quietly. "The Blackwoods? Maybe. Or maybe someone else who doesn't want this reunion to happen." We walked quickly toward Chen's car, a nondescript gray Toyota that looked like 1,000 other cars in the area. As we got in, I saw the black sedan's engine start. "They're following us," I said. Chen smiled grimly and started the car. "Let them try." Made a series of traffic and immediately made a NASCAR driver proud. Within minutes, we'd lost the sedan in the maze of Millbrook's downtown streets. "Nice driving," I said. "Your father hired me for more than my conversation skills." As we drove toward the Millbrook Inn, I clutched the manila folder and tried to prepare myself for meeting the people who'd given me life, lost me to hijackers, and spent 32 years trying to find me again. Behind us, somewhere in the city, the black sedan was probably still looking for us. And at home, Evelyn was probably calling the Blackwoods to tell them their carefully constructed lie was falling apart. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The presidential suite at the Millbrook Inn was nothing like the cold grandeur of the Blackwood mansion. It was elegant but warm, expensive but comfortable, the kind of place where people actually lived instead of just existing for show. William Thornfield stood when Chen and I entered. He was exactly as he'd appeared in the photograph, but seeing him in person was like looking into a mirror that showed me 30 years in the future. Same height, same build, same way of holding his shoulders. When he smiled, I recognized my own expression. "Jonathan," he said, and his voice broke slightly on the name. "It's Jack now," I said. "Has been for 32 years. "Jack, then." He approached slowly, like he was afraid I might bolt. "May I?" I mean to a hug that felt like coming home. This man was a stranger, but his embrace felt more familiar than any I'd received from Charles Blackwood in 3 decades. Elizabeth Thornfield rose from her seat by the window. She was smaller than I'd expected, more delicate, but there was steel in her eyes that I recognized from my own mirror. She'd been crying, her eyes were red and puffy, but she was smiling through the tears. "My baby," she whispered, touching my face with trembling fingers. "My beautiful baby boy." "I'm not exactly a baby anymore," I said, but I didn't pull away from her touch. "You are to me. You always will be." We sat down in the suite's living area, William and Elizabeth on the couch, me in an armchair across from them, Chen standing by the door like a bodyguard. "Tell me what happened," I said. "Tell me everything." William took his wife's hand before he began. "You were born March 15th, 1991, at Boston General Hospital. Perfect delivery, perfect baby, 10 fingers and 10 toes. We were the happiest people in the world." Elizabeth picked up the story. "I was exhausted from the delivery, so I was sleeping a lot those first few days. You were in the nursery most of the time, being fed and changed by the nurses. On the 5th day, March 20th, I went to the nursery for your morning feeding and..." Her voice trailed off. "You were gone," William finished. "Just gone. The nurses thought you were with us. We thought you were in the nursery. By the time anyone realized what had happened, you'd been missing for hours." "The police?" I asked. "Did everything they could. But hospital security in 1991 wasn't what it is now. No cameras in the nursery, minimal access controls. Someone had walked in wearing scrubs and walked out with our son." "Any leads?" "Darkened. Several. All of them led to dead ends or disappeared witnesses. But about 2 years into the investigation, we started hearing rumors about a black market adoption ring. Wealthy couples who couldn't have children or didn't want to wait for legal adoptions could buy babies, no questions asked." "The Blackwoods," I said. "We suspected, but we couldn't prove it. Charles Blackwood had connections everywhere. Police, judges, politicians. And officially, you didn't exist. The adoption record showed you were born to a teenage mother who gave you up voluntarily." Elizabeth leaned forward. "But we never stopped looking. Never stopped believing you were alive somewhere. How did you finally find me?" Chen stepped forward. 5 years ago, we got a tip from someone inside the Blackwood organization. They told us Charles had been bragging about his acquisition of a son, how he'd gotten around all the legal red tape. "What's the tip from?" "We don't know. The information came through intermediaries, but it was solid. Birth date, physical description, even some details about your childhood that matched what we'd learned from other sources." William pulled out a thick folder from the coffee table. We've been building a case ever since. Financial records showing large cash payments from Charles Blackwood to known criminals. Hospital employee records showing suspicious terminations right after your disappearance. Adoption documents with forged signatures. Enough to prosecute? More than enough. But we needed you to be ready to come forward. As long as you considered the Blackwoods your family, you might not have been willing to testify against them. I thought about last night's dinner, Margaret's cold dismissal, the casual cruelty with which they discarded 32 years of family history. I'm ready now, I said. Elizabeth smiled through fresh tears. There's something else, Jack. Something we need to tell you about your inheritance. Chen mentioned $200 million. That's just the liquid assets, William said. There are also properties, investments, trust funds, and there's something else, something we set up specifically for you. He pulled out another document. When you disappeared, we established the Jonathan Thornfield Foundation. Every year for the past 32 years, we've put money into it, initially for the search efforts, but as those wound down, we kept contributing. It's worth about $50 million now. $50 million, just sitting there. Waiting for you, Elizabeth said. We always believed you'd come home someday. I stared at the documents, trying to process the magnitude of these reasons. Maybe it's so much more, but the reasons taken the moment, I figured out. William and Elizabeth exchanged glances. Not a catch exactly, but there are some complications. Such as? Chen answered. The Blackwoods know we've found you. They've known for months that this day was coming, and they're not going to give up without a fight. What can they do? I'm not their son, I never was. They have no legal claim on me. No, but they have 32 years of documentation showing that you are Jack Blackwood. They could claim that even if you were abducted as a baby, you're now legally their son through adoption. They could tie up your inheritance in court for years. And there's something else, William said grimly. We think they might try to damage you. Damage me how? Think about it from their perspective. Yesterday you were a construction worker with no legal claim on any significant money. Today, you're the heir to a fortune that makes their wealth look insignificant. And you're the key witness in an abduction case that could send Charles Blackwood to prison for the rest of his life. Chen walked to the window and peered through the curtains. That's why we need to move quickly. We've already filed preliminary paperwork with the district attorney's office. The case will be public knowledge within 24 hours. What do you need from me? Your testimony, your cooperation with the investigation, and your agreement to accept your rightful identity as Jonathan Thornfield. I looked at these people who'd given me life, lost me to criminals, and spent 3 decades trying to bring me home. Then I thought about the people who'd raised me, used me, and discarded me the moment I became inconvenient. Where do I sign? Elizabeth burst into fresh tears, but these were tears of joy. William stood and shook my hand formally like we were sealing a business deal rather than reuniting a family. Welcome home, son, he said. Chen handed me a pen and a stack of legal documents. As I signed my name, my real name, Jonathan Michael Thornfield, I felt like I was finally becoming the person I was always meant to be. There's one more thing, I said, looking up from the paperwork. My wife. She's been working with someone at her law firm to manipulate the situation. They knew about the adoption before I did. His expression hardened. What's her name? Evelyn Blackwood. Well, Evelyn Morrison before we married. She works at Morrison, Lockwood and Associates. Morrison, William repeated. As in Detective Morrison? The Boston cop who was questioning your private investigator friend this morning? I don't know. Maybe. Not maybe, Chen said. And Associates is owned by the same holding company that handles the Blackwood family's legal affairs. Your wife isn't just cheating on you, Jack. She's been spying on you for the people who abducted you. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. It was one thing to discover that Evelyn was having an affair. It was something else entirely to learn that our entire marriage had been a lie, a surveillance operation designed to keep tabs on the abducted heir who might someday reclaim his birthright. How long? I asked. We're not sure, but given the timing of your marriage and the start of our investigation, I'd guess from the beginning. 5 years. 5 years of 5 years of Strangeman listing like, for a big process, who was reporting my every move to the people who'd stolen me from my real family. I want them to pay, I said. All of them. The Blackwoods, Evelyn, her law firm, everyone who is involved in this. They will, William promised. But first, we need to keep you safe. The moment this story goes public, you become a target. What kind of target? Disappear permanently. $250 million is a lot of motivation for homicide. Summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Stop digging, or you'll be buried with what you find. I showed the message to Chen, who immediately pulled out his own phone. We're moving you to a safe house, he said. Tonight. What about Frank, the private investigator? We'll take care of him too. Wilmington touched my arm. Jack, I know this is overwhelming, but we're not going to lose you again. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we're going to keep you safe and make the people who took you from us pay for what they did. I looked around the hotel suite that had become my temporary sanctuary, at these people who were strangers but felt like family, at the documents that proved I was someone completely different from who I'd thought I was my entire life. 24 hours ago, I'd been Jack Blackwood, the adopted son who didn't quite fit in. Now I was Jonathan Thornfield, heir to a fortune and key witness in an abduction case that would destroy the only family I'd ever known. The funny thing was, I'd never felt more like myself. The safe house was a modest cabin about an hour north of Millbrook, surrounded by woods and accessible only by a single dirt road. Chen had driven us there in the gray Toyota, taking a route that involved more backtracking and sudden turns than a GPS malfunction. How long do we stay here? I asked as we pulled up to the cabin. Until the district attorney is ready to move forward with the case. Should be a few days, maybe a week. What about my life, my business? I can't just disappear. Your life as Jack Blackwood is over, Chen said bluntly. The sooner you accept that, the safer you'll be. The cabin was spartanly furnished but comfortable. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room with a stone fireplace. William and Elizabeth had driven separately and were already there when we arrived, along with another man Chen introduced as Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent who now handled security for the Thornfield family. Perimeter is secure, Webb reported. Motion sensors on all approaches, cameras covering the access road. If anyone comes looking for us, we'll know about it long before they get here. I settled into one of the bedrooms and tried to process everything that had happened. This morning, I'd been a construction worker with a cheating wife and a family that had disowned me. Tonight, I was a abduction sufferer with a $250 million inheritance and parents who'd spent 32 years looking for me. My phone had been buzzing constantly with calls and texts. Evelyn, the Blackwoods, even some numbers I didn't recognize. Chen had advised me not to answer any of them. Let them wonder where you are, he'd said. Uncertainty makes people nervous, and nervous people make mistakes. Around heard a car approaching on the access road. Webb's voice came through the cabin's intercom system. Vehicle approaching. Single occupant female driving a silver BMW. Evelyn. She'd found me somehow. I got dressed and went to the living room where Chen and Webb were watching the security monitors. On the screen, I could see Evelyn's car pulling up to the cabin. She got out alone, looking around nervously. How did she find us? I asked. Good question, Chen said grimly. This location is supposed to be known only to us. Webb spoke into his radio. She's alone, but that doesn't mean backup isn't coming. Stay alert. Evelyn walked up to the front door and knocked. Jack, I know you're in there. We need to talk. But remember, everything she says could be a lie designed to manipulate you. Let her in, I said. I want to hear what she has to say. Kept his hand near his concealed weapon. Evelyn stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim lighting. Jack, thank God you're safe. I've been worried sick about you. Have you? I said. Or have you been worried about your bosses losing track of their asset? Her face went pale. What are you talking about? I know about Morrison, Lockwood and Associates. I know about Morrison, Lockwood and Associates. You know about the connection to the Blackwood family? I know our entire marriage has been a surveillance operation. Evelyn looked around the room, taking in Chen, Webb, and William and Elizabeth, who had emerged from their bedroom. You don't understand, she said. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me. I was hired to watch you, yes, but not by the Blackwoods. I was hired by them. She pointed at William and Elizabeth. By your real parents. The room fell silent. Chen and Webb exchanged glances. William stepped forward. That's impossible. We've never hired anyone to surveil our son. Not directly, Evelyn said, but 5 years ago, a man approached me. He said he represented a wealthy family who was looking for a missing heir. He offered me a job at Morrison, Lockwood and Associates, and a substantial bonus if I could get close to Jack Blackwood and report on his activities. What man? Elizabeth asked. All eyes turned to Chen, who looked genuinely confused. My thinking's going to mean. All eyes turned to Chen. He said he represented a wealthy family who was looking for a Jack Blackwood and report on his activities. What man? All eyes turned to Chen, who looked genuinely confused. I don't have a brother named Thomas, and I certainly didn't hire anyone to spy on Jack. But he knew things, Evelyn the Blackwood family, about the abduction. He showed me photographs, documents, proof that Jack was really Jonathan Thornfield. Webb stepped closer to Evelyn. Describe this man. 50s, well-dressed, spoke with a slight accent, Canadian, I think. He paid me $50,000 up front and promised another $100,000 when the job was complete. When what job was complete? I asked. When Jack learned the truth about his identity and was reunited with his real family. William and Elizabeth looked at each other with confusion and growing further, and then going, "We didn't hire anyone," William said firmly. "We've been conducting our own investigation through legitimate channels." Then who did? Evelyn asked. Chen pulled out his phone and started making calls. I need to check something. Webb, keep everyone here secure. Don't let anyone else in or out until I figure out what's going on. As Chen stepped outside to make his calls, I studied my wife's face. She looked genuinely confused and frightened, not like someone who'd been caught in a lie. The affair with Brent Lockwood, I said. Was that part of the job too? Evelyn's face crumpled. No. What? I'm trying the most of the trader jobs look like. The first channel tries to get that further part of the truth. That was, Jack, I never meant for that to happen. But spending 5 years pretending to be in love with someone, watching them, reporting on their every move, it does something to you. I lost track of what was real and what was performance. So you found something real with Brent instead. I thought I did, but now I'm not sure about anything. Webb's radio crackled. Multiple vehicles approaching, at least 3 cars moving fast. Through the cabin's windows, we could see headlights cutting through the darkness. Chen came back inside, his face grim. We have a problem. The man who hired Evelyn doesn't exist. Thomas Chen is a fabricated identity. But whoever created it had access to classified information about our investigation. Which means, I asked. Which means someone has been playing all of us. The Blackwoods, us, even Evelyn. Someone who wanted Jack to discover his real identity, but wanted to control how and when it happened. The headlights were getting closer. Webb was checking his weapons and speaking rapidly into his radio. We need to move, he said. Now. Where? William asked. There's a back trail through the woods. It leads to a secondary road about half a mile away. I have a backup vehicle stashed there. I gathered our things. I grabbed Evelyn's arm. Why know this isn't just another manipulation? Because I'm probably going to die tonight for telling you the truth. If I was still working for whoever hired me, would I be here trying to warn you? The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the woods. Webb eliminated the lights in the cabin and motioned for us to head toward the back door. Move quietly, he whispered. Stay together, stay low, and whatever happens, don't stop until we reach the backup vehicle. As we slipped out the back of the cabin and into the dark woods, I could hear voices from the front of the building. Men's voices, speaking in low, urgent tones. They're not here, one voice said. Check the bedrooms, another replied. We moved through the woods as quietly as we could, but every snapping twig sounded like a bang in the silence. Behind us, flashlight beams began sweeping through the trees. They know we're out here, Webb whispered. How many? Chen asked. At least 6, maybe more. We reached the secondary road just as the woods of the moving. Flashlight beams were getting close. Webb's backup vehicle was an old Jeep Cherokee, battered but reliable looking. Everyone in, Webb said. As we piled into the Jeep, I could see the flashlights emerging from the tree line. Men in dark clothing, moving with military precision. Webb started the engine and pulled away without turning on the headlights, navigating by moonlight and memory. In the side mirror, I could see our pursuers reaching the road, but they were too late. Who were they? Elizabeth asked. Professionals, Webb said. Ex-military, probably private contractors. Working for who? That's the million-dollar question, or in this case, the $250 million question. As we drove through the darkness toward an unknown destination, I realized that discovering my true identity had made me more than just wealthy. It had made me a target in a game I didn't understand, with players I couldn't identify, and rules that seemed to change by the hour. But one thing was becoming clear. Someone had been orchestrating events for years, manipulating all of us like pieces on a chessboard. The question was whether I was the prize they were trying to win, or the obstacle they were trying to remove. The backup safe house was a warehouse in an industrial district outside Boston, the kind of place where no one asked questions about late-night activities. Webb had made several calls during the drive, and when we arrived, 2 other security specialists were waiting for us. "This ends tonight," William said as we gathered in the warehouse's makeshift conference room. "I'm not going to spend the rest of my life running from shadows." "What do you propose?" Chen asked. "We draw them out. Make them come to us on our terms instead of constantly reacting to their moves." Webb nodded approvingly. "I like it. What did you have in mind?" William pulled out his phone. "We're going to call a press conference. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at the Millbrook Inn. We announce Jonathan's true identity, the abduction case, everything. Force whoever's been pulling the strings to show their hand." "That's incredibly risky," Chen protested. "If we're wrong about who's behind this, we could be walking into a trap." "We're already in a trap," I said. "At least this way, we choose the battlefield." Evelyn, who had been quiet during the drive, finally spoke up. "There's something else you need to know. About the press conference." "What about it?" "Brent Lockwood has been preparing for this moment for months. He has a team of lawyers ready to challenge Jonathan's identity, to claim that the Thornfield family is trying to steal the Blackwood heir." "On what grounds?" "Adverse possession. The legal principle that if you openly occupy someone else's property for long enough, it becomes yours. They're going to argue that even if Jack was abducted as a baby, 32 years of being raised as a Blackwood makes him legally their son." William laughed bitterly. "They steal my child and then claim ownership through theft? That's obscene." "It's also potentially effective," Evelyn said. "Brent is very good at what he does." "Was," Webb corrected. "He was very good at what he did." "What do you mean?" Webb showed us his phone, which displayed in a Blackwood Singles Bren that the Blackwood Fulchid becomes funding. It's still that news article from Dead in Office. Evelyn gasped. "He's dead?" "It's just don't really done. Ev parents self-destruction," Webb read. "Found this morning with a single bang wound to the head and a note confessing to involvement in a decades-old abduction case." "Self-destruction?" I said. "Or homicide made to look like self-destruction?" "Given recent events, I'd say homicide," Chen replied. "Someone is cleaning house, eliminating anyone who knows too much about what really happened." Evelyn had gone pale. "If they eliminated Brent, then I'm next. I know as much as he did, maybe more." "Not necessarily," William said. "You were hired by this mysterious Thomas Chen, not by the Blackwoods directly. You might be more valuable as a witness than as a sufferer." Webb added grimly, "You might be next on the list either way." We spent the next several hours planning for the press conference. William would make the announcement about my true identity. I would give a brief statement about the abduction and my desire for justice. Chen would present the evidence we'd gathered, and Evelyn would testify about being hired to spy on me by an unknown party. "What about the Blackwoods?" I asked. "Do we give them advance warning, or do they find out with everyone else?" "They already know," Chen said. "I guarantee they've been monitoring police communications, court filings, everything. They know we're building a case against them." "Good," I said. "Let them sweat." As dawn approached, we prepared to leave for the press conference. Webb and his team would provide security, with additional backup from law enforcement agencies that William had contacted through his political connections. "Are you ready for this?" Elizabeth asked as we got into the cars. "I've been ready for 32 years, I said. "I just didn't know it." The Millbrook Inn was surrounded by news vans and reporters when we arrived. Word had leaked about the press conference, and the media was buzzing with speculation about what would be announced. We set up in the hotel's main conference room, with cameras and microphones focused on the podium where William would speak. I sat at a table to one side with Elizabeth and Chen, trying to calm my nerves. At exactly 9 a.m., William approached the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. My name is William Thornfield, former Prime Minister of Canada. 32 years ago, my son Jonathan was abducted from Boston General Hospital when he was 5 days old. Today, I'm here to announce that we have found him. Murmur through the crowd of reporters. Cameras flashed as William gestured toward me. The man you know as Jack Blackwood is actually my son, Jonathan Thornfield. He was stolen from us as a baby and illegally adopted by Charles and Margaret Blackwood through a criminal conspiracy that we are now prepared to expose. The murmur became a roar, and the 30 years is both bridge and the transform that was cold by the world. The murmur became a war, as at the came of Jonathan Thornfield, that was reporters shouted questions, cameras clicked rapidly, and I could see several people in the back of the room making urgent phone calls. William held up his hand for quiet. We have evidence that the Blackwood family paid criminals to abduct our son and then use their wealth and connections to create false adoption records. We are calling for a full investigation and prosecution of everyone involved in this crime. Mr. Thornfield, a reporter called out, what proof do you have of these allegations? Chen stepped forward and began reaching getting to freedom, another world, birth records, adoption documents, financial records showing suspicious payments, testimony from hospital employees who had been threatened or bribed to remain silent. As Chen spoke, I noticed a commotion near the back of the room. Several men in suits were pushing through the crowd, and I recognized one of them as Charles Blackwood. This is all lies, Charles shouted as he approached the podium. Jack is my son, legally adopted through proper channels. This is nothing but an extortion attempt by a family trying to steal our heir. Your heir? William stepped away from the podium to face Charles directly. You mean the child you bought from hijackers? I mean the son I raised, educated, and loved for 32 years while you were off playing politician and ignoring your family responsibilities. The room erupted in chaos. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashed, and security personnel moved to keep the two men separated. But I had stopped paying attention to the confrontation between my two fathers, because in the crowd, I had spotted a familiar face, the man who had gotten out of the black sedan outside Frank's office yesterday. He was moving purposefully through the chaos, his hand inside his jacket, his eyes fixed on me. Webb! I shouted, pointing at the man. Webb's head snapped around and he immediately saw what I was seeing. He started moving toward the man, but the crowd was too thick, the chaos too complete. The man pulled his hand from his jacket, and I saw the glint of metal. Tool! Webb yelled. Everything happened in slow motion after that. The man raised his weapon, aiming not at me but at William. Elizabeth screamed. Chen dove toward my father. Webb drew his own tool and fired. The assassin's shot went wide as Webb's bullet struck him in the shoulder. He stumbled backward, his weapon clattering to the floor, and was immediately tackled by hotel security. In the aftermath, as police sirens wailed outside and paramedics checked everyone for injuries, I found myself standing next to Charles Blackwood. Why? I asked him. Why did you do it? Why steal me from my real family? Charles looked older than his 68 years, defeated and exhausted. Because Margaret couldn't have children, and we wanted a son. We didn't know you were abducted. We were told your mother was a teenager who couldn't care for you. You're lying. Safeguards. No, he said quietly. I'm not. We were lied to as well. By the same people who have been manipulating all of us for decades. What people? Allergies before Charles could answer, Webb appeared at my side. The shooter's talking. Says he was hired by someone called Thomas Chen to eliminate William Thornfield and make it look like a revenge eliminating by the Blackwood family. Thomas Chen again, I said. Who is he really? We're about to find out, Webb said. The FBI is tracing the money trail from the payments to Evelyn and the assassin. Should have answers within hours. As the police cleared the conference room and took statements from everyone involved, I realized that the press conference had accomplished exactly what we'd hoped. It had forced our mysterious puppet master to show his hand. Now we just had to figure out who he was and why he'd spent years orchestrating this elaborate game of family destruction and reconstruction. But as I watched Charles Blackwood being led away by federal agents, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. He'd been played just as much as the rest of us, manipulated into believing he was rescuing an unwanted child when he was actually buying stolen goods. The real villain was still out there somewhere. probably watching the news coverage and planning his next move. But for the first time in days, I felt like we were finally ahead of him instead of constantly reacting to his schemes. The game wasn't over, but at least now I knew I was playing it. The FBI's financial investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within 6 hours of the failed assassination attempt, they had traced the payments to both Evelyn and the gunman back through a series of shell companies to a single source, a man named Dr. Harold Winters, former director of pediatrics at Boston General Hospital. He was the inside man, Agent Sarah Martinez explained as we gathered in the FBI's Boston field office. 32 years ago, he identified newborns from wealthy families and arranged for their abduction. The babies were then sold to couples who couldn't have children through legal adoption. "How many babies?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We're still investigating, but so far we've identified at least 12 cases over a 5-year period. Jonathan was just one of many." His face was stone. "Where is Winters now?" "Flooring. Dead. Apparent heart attack 3 days ago, right around the time you hired the private investigator. But before he died, he left detailed records of his operation, including a confession and evidence against his co-conspirators." "But he confessed?" I asked. "Because he was dying anyway. Terminal cancer, maybe 6 months to live. He wanted to clear his conscience before he went." Agent Martinez spread out a series of photographs on the minute. "These are the first couples who bought abducted babies from Winters. The Blackwoods were actually his biggest customers. They bought 3 children over 4 years. 3? I looked at the photos more carefully. "David and Patricia too?" "David Morrison, purchased in 1989. Patricia Chen, purchased in 1990. And Jonathan Thornfield, purchased in 1991. Silent as the implication sank in. None of us were actually Blackwoods. We were all stolen children, sold to a couple who desperately wanted a family and didn't ask too many questions about where their children came from." "So David and Patricia don't know either?" I asked. "We don't think so. The Blackwoods have been very careful to maintain the fiction that all 3 adoptions were legitimate, but we'll be informing them shortly." The real Chen, not the mysterious Thomas who had hired Evelyn, leaned forward. "What about the man who's been orchestrating recent events? The fake Thomas Chen?" "That would be Dr. Marcus Webb." We all turned to look at Webb, who had been standing quietly by the door during the briefing. He was gone. "Where?" I started to say, but Martinez held up her hand. "Not your Webb. Dr. Marcus Webb, Harold Winters' former partner and co-conspirator. He's been using various false identities for years, including Thomas Chen. When Winters decided to confess, Webb panicked and started trying to eliminate anyone who could connect him to the abduction ring. But why hire Evelyn to spy on me? Why orchestrate my reunion with my real parents? Because he knew Winters was going to confess eventually. He wanted to control the narrative, make it look like a simple case of one family stealing from another, rather than part of a larger criminal conspiracy. If you were reunited with the Thornfields and focused on revenge against the Blackwoods, you might not dig deeper into who was really behind your abduction. And the assassination attempt? Plan B. If he couldn't control the story, he'd eliminate the key witnesses and let the Blackwoods take the blame. Glenn Martinez's radio crackled. "Martinez here. We got him. Webb, the real Webb, just tried to board a flight to Switzerland. He's in custody." Manslaughter. "Excellent. Bring him in." As the FBI agents prepared to leave, Agent Martinez turned back to us. "There's one more thing. The Blackwood estate. It's going to be frozen pending investigation. Charles and Margaret are facing federal abduction charges. Even though they may not have known the children were stolen, their assets will likely be seized as proceeds of criminal activity." "What about David and Patricia?" I asked. "They're sufferers, just like you. But they're also going to have to face the fact that their entire lives have been built on a lie." William put his hand on my shoulder. "What do you want to do about them?" I thought about my adoptive siblings, their smug certainty that they deserved the family wealth more than I did, their casual cruelty at last night's dinner. But I also thought about what it would feel like to learn that your entire identity was a fabrication, that your parents were criminals, that your real family was out there somewhere wondering what had happened to you. "Help them," I said. "Help them find their real families, just like you found me." Elizabeth smiled through her tears. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." Over the following weeks, the story dominated national news. The Blackwood abduction ring, as the media dubbed it, became the subject of congressional hearings, FBI investigations, and countless news specials. Charles and Margaret Blackwood were indicted on multiple federal charges. Dr. Marcus Webb was charged with abduction, conspiracy, attempted homicide, and a dozen other crimes. David Morrison turned out to be the son of a wealthy Texas oil family who had never stopped looking for him. Patricia Chen was the daughter of a Silicon Valley tech executive and a prominent surgeon. Both families were overjoyed to be reunited with their stolen children. The Blackwood estate was indeed seized by the federal government, but in an ironic twist, the three abducted children, David, Patricia, and I, were awarded significant compensation from the seized assets as sufferers of the crime. Evelyn and I divorced quietly. She testified against Dr. Webb in exchange for immunity from prosecution, then moved to California to start over. I wished her well. She had been manipulated just as much as the rest of us, and I couldn't find it in myself to hate her for being human enough to fall for the manipulation. As for me, I moved back into my little house by the lake. It wasn't little anymore, though. I'd used some of my newfound wealth to expand it, add a workshop, put in a proper garden. It was still modest compared to the Blackwood Mansion or the Thornfield estate, but it was mine in a way that no inherited property could ever be. William and Elizabeth visited often. We were building a relationship slowly, carefully, without trying to make up for 32 lost years all at once. I was their son, but I was also a stranger, and we all needed time to figure out what that meant. I kept working construction, kept building things with my hands, kept living the life I'd chosen rather than the life that had been chosen for me. The money was nice. It meant I could pick my projects, work with people I liked, build things that mattered, but it didn't define me. On a warm evening in late summer, I was sitting on my deck watching the sunset over the lake when Frank Harlan stopped by. He looked better than he had in his cluttered office, cleaner, more alert, like he'd found a new purpose in life. "Thought you'd want to know," he said, accepting the beer I offered him. "Webb got life without parole. Charles and Margaret Blackwood got 20 years each. The whole abduction ring has been shut down permanently." "Good," I said. "What about you? What's next for the famous private investigator who cracked the case of the century?" Frank grinned. "Retirement. Your parents, your security position with their security team. Seems they want to make sure nothing like this ever happens to any other families." "That sounds perfect for you." "Yeah, it does." Frank raised his beer in a toast. "To finding out who you really are." "To finding out who you really are," I agreed. As Frank drove away and the stars came out over the lake, I thought about the past few months. I'd lost a family that had never really been mine, gained a family I'd never known existed, discovered that my entire life had been built on lies, and somehow managed to come out the other side as myself. The funny thing was, I felt more like Jack Blackwood than I ever had before. Not because that was my legal name or because I'd been raised with it, but because I'd chosen to keep it. Jonathan Thornfield was my birth name, my genetic inheritance, my connection to parents who had never stopped loving me. But Jack Blackwood was who I'd become through my own choices, my own work, my own determination to be something more than what other people expected. I was both and neither. A man who had been stolen as a baby and found as an adult, who had lost everything and gained more than he'd ever imagined possible. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged.